The year is 1945, and the world stands on the precipice of a new era. The war that has reshaped the globe is nearing its end, yet one man refuses to accept the inevitable. Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Third Reich, the architect of destruction, the figurehead of a movement that had plunged the world into chaos, still clings to the belief that victory is within reach. But it is not. The landscape of Europe has shifted dramatically. Germany, which once stood as the dominant force in Europe, is now on the brink of annihilation. The Allies, both Western and Eastern, have encircled the Reich. The Soviet Union pushes through the East, reclaiming territory that had been lost. In the West, the United States, Britain, and France press from all sides. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence of impending defeat, Hitler clings to a dangerous illusion that Germany can still win. In the final days of the war, Hitler delivers a speech to the German army. It is not just a speech, but a desperate plea, a call to arms for soldiers who have already seen their comrades fall, for generals who are well aware of the futility of their mission. But Hitler's words are powerful, his voice unwavering, as if the very power of his speech could turn the tide of the war. He does not speak of surrender or retreat. Instead, he speaks of victory, of honor, and of sacrifice. In the wake of the devastation caused by years of war, there are few who believe in his words. The German people are broken, the soldiers exhausted, and the rest of the world impatient. But Hitler's speech is not one for the world. It is for the men still in uniform, for those who have placed their trust in him, for the few who have not yet lost hope. It is a speech meant to unite them in a final stand, even as their position grows increasingly untenable. The speech begins with the rhetoric of a man who is fully aware of the cost of war, yet refuses to acknowledge its toll on his nation. Hitler speaks of the sacrifices made, of the honor of the German soldier, and of the indomitable spirit of the Reich. But there is no mention of the atrocities his regime has committed. There is no recognition of the millions of lives lost in the name of his twisted vision. Instead, he paints a picture of a heroic struggle, one that will go down in history as the final testament to the strength of the German people. As the speech unfolds, the urgency becomes palpable. Hitler speaks of the inevitable victory that will come if only the soldiers hold their ground. He tells them that the Reich is stronger than ever, that the Allies are at their breaking point, and that Germany will rise again. His words are calculated to invoke pride, to reignite the flames of nationalism in the hearts of those who have fought for so long. He invokes the spirit of past German leaders, claiming that this is a continuation of their struggle, but the reality is different. Outside the walls of Hitler's bunker, the situation is dire. The German army has been in retreat for months. The forces that had once swept across Europe are now on the defensive. Berlin, the heart of the Reich, is surrounded, and the Allies are closing in. Hitler's generals, once loyal to him, now question his leadership. Many have seen firsthand the consequences of his reckless decisions, the horrors of the war, and the devastating toll it has taken on their country. But even in these final moments, Hitler refuses to back down. He speaks of the bravery of the German soldier, of the need for loyalty and discipline. He urges his troops to stand firm, to believe in the cause, and to fight until the very end. It is a call to arms for an army that no longer has the strength to fight, for men who have seen their comrades fall in brutal battles, for soldiers who have been pushed to the brink of exhaustion. But beneath the words of loyalty and resolve, there is something else. Hitler knows that he is running out of time. He knows that the world is closing in on him. And as his speech grows more desperate, his words become less about the soldiers and more about himself. He speaks of his personal vision for the future of Germany, of the role he sees for himself in the history books. The rhetoric is no longer just about winning a war. It is about preserving his legacy. The speech also reveals the complete detachment from reality that has consumed Hitler. He speaks as though victory is still within reach, as if the war has not already been lost. There is no mention of the millions who have died at his command, no recognition of the genocide that has unfolded under his regime. Instead, his speech focuses on a future that will never come, a future where Germany is victorious and its people are revered for their sacrifice. This speech is not about the soldiers on the ground. It is about Hitler's own need to maintain control, to hold on to the power that has defined his life for over a decade. The German army, once the pinnacle of military might, is now little more than a shell of its former self. The soldiers once eager to fight for their Führer are now weary and disillusioned. They are not fighting for victory, they are fighting for survival. Hitler's words echo through the halls of his bunker, but outside the fate of Germany is already sealed. The world has changed. The old order is crumbling, and a new one is rising from the ashes of the war. The leaders of the Allies, Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, are preparing to reshape the world, to create a new order that will ensure the mistakes of the past are not repeated. And in the midst of this transformation, Hitler's words are nothing more than a final plea for relevance, a last attempt to hold on to a world that no longer exists. As the speech draws to a close, Hitler's tone shifts. There is no longer any talk of victory or glory. Instead, he speaks of the honor of fighting to the end, of standing firm in the face of defeat. He urges his generals to take charge, to lead their soldiers with courage, to fight with all the strength they have left. But the truth is undeniable. The German army is broken. The Reich is finished. And yet Hitler's speech ends with a call to action. He asks his generals to believe in the impossible, to fight for a future that will never come. He implores them to hold the line, to stand against the inevitable collapse of their nation. But the collapse has already begun. The Allies are at the gates. The Soviet forces are closing in on Berlin. The war is over. The Third Reich is no more. In the end, Hitler's last speech is not a call to arms. It is the sound of a leader who has lost everything. It is the desperate cry of a man who refuses to accept the consequences of his actions, who will go down in history not as a hero, but as the architect of his own destruction. As Adolf Hitler's final speech to the German army echoes through the bunkers of Berlin, the immediate reality outside is one of utter destruction. His words, however fervently delivered, do not change the trajectory of the war. The situation in Berlin and across Germany grows increasingly grim with every passing day. The Allies have advanced further into the heart of the Reich, and the Soviet forces, closing in from the east, stand poised at the gates of the capital. Hitler, holed up in his underground bunker, continues to issue commands, but his authority is slipping away, as is his control over the military forces he once commanded with ruthless precision. The final speech to the army, though impassioned, reveals a deep sense of denial. For a man who once held Europe in his grasp, the end is near, but he refuses to accept it. The speech he delivers to his generals and soldiers may be remembered for its fervor, but its contents are steeped in the delusion of a leader who has already lost the war. The effects of this speech ripple through the German ranks. The soldiers who hear his words are not inspired by the idea of victory. They are exhausted, depleted, and demoralized. The majority of the German army is no longer willing to fight for a lost cause, and in their hearts, they know the war is already over. Many soldiers are more focused on surviving the conflict than on fulfilling any further orders. Hitler's speech does little to reignite their will to win a war that has already claimed millions of lives and caused irreversible damage. The people of Germany, too, are disillusioned by the leadership of a man who led them into disaster. For years, they were told that the war was a necessary fight for the future of Germany, that it was a fight for glory, for nationalism, and for survival. But now, with the Allies marching on Berlin and the Soviets tearing through Eastern Europe, the promises of a brighter future seem laughable. The reality is stark. The Third Reich is crumbling, and the dream of a victorious Germany is a thing of the past. As Hitler continues to cling to his delusions, the world outside is moving swiftly toward the final phase of the war. The Allied forces, particularly the United States and Britain, are relentless in their push toward victory. The United States, having entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, is now an unstoppable force in both the European and Pacific theaters. The U.S. military is advancing rapidly through France and into the heart of Germany, crushing any remaining pockets of resistance along the way. The British, under the leadership of Winston Churchill, are equally resolute. Churchill's speeches, unlike Hitler's, emphasize unity and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. His defiance against the Nazis in the early days of the war inspired a nation to fight on when it seemed like all was lost. As the war progressed, the British military continued to hammer at the German defenses, pushing towards Berlin from the west. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union's Red Army, led by Joseph Stalin, is advancing at a terrifying pace. The Soviets have already recaptured vast swaths of land, and their relentless offensive toward Berlin is nearing its end. The Red Army has no mercy for the soldiers it encounters, as the brutality of the Eastern Front has left both sides scarred. The Soviet forces are determined to exact their revenge for the devastation inflicted on the Soviet Union by the Nazi invasion. By the time of Hitler's last speech, the end of the war is already a foregone conclusion. The Allies are on the verge of victory, and Berlin's fall is imminent. As Hitler's speech concludes, there is little more that can be done to stop the inevitable. The German people, long suffering under the crushing weight of war, begin to grasp the magnitude of their situation. The failure of the Nazi regime is not just political, it is moral, social, and cultural. The empire that Hitler dreamed of building has turned into a nightmare that will haunt the world for decades to come. Inside the bunker, Hitler's speeches and orders become increasingly erratic. He is isolated, surrounded by loyalists who, even at this late stage, continue to support him in the hopes of achieving a last-minute victory. His generals, who were once filled with fear and obedience, are now in open rebellion. The high command of the German military has lost faith in their Führer, and many are making covert plans to save themselves from the inevitable collapse. The chaos within the German ranks is compounded by the horrific realities unfolding in Berlin. As Soviet troops close in from the east and the Allies approach from the west, civilians in the capital are caught in a terrifying situation. There is no food, no resources, and no way to escape the wrath of the advancing forces. The citizens of Berlin, many of whom had been indoctrinated into the Nazi ideology, now find themselves trapped in a city that is burning to the ground. The air is thick with smoke, and the sound of explosions reverberates through the streets as the city falls under siege. The collapse of the Reich is marked not only by military defeat, but also by the dismantling of the Nazi propaganda machine. For years, Hitler's speeches and the rhetoric of the Nazi regime portrayed the German people as a superior race, destined to rule the world. But as the Reich falls apart, the hollow promises of the Nazi propaganda become evident. The idea of a master race, the notion of German superiority, and the dream of a 1,000-year Reich all crumble in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. As Hitler's regime collapses, so too does the belief in the Nazi ideology. For years, the German people had been fed a constant stream of lies, from the scapegoating of Jews and other minorities to the glorification of war and violence. But now, with their country in ruins and their leaders defeated, many begin to question the foundation of the ideology that led them down this dark path. The horrors of the Holocaust, the devastation of the war, and the loss of countless lives have shattered the myth of Nazi supremacy. The end of the war also marks the beginning of a long and painful process of reckoning. In the aftermath of Hitler's death, the world is left to pick up the pieces. The Nuremberg trials will later hold the remaining leaders of the Nazi regime accountable for the atrocities they committed. The world will come to terms with the scale of the Holocaust, the genocide that claimed the lives of 6 million Jews and millions of others. The consequences of Hitler's last speech extend far beyond the defeat of Nazi Germany. The legacy of his words and actions will continue to shape the course of history. The devastation wrought by the war, the atrocities of the Holocaust, and the collapse of the Nazi regime serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, ideology, and hate. In the years that follow, Germany will struggle to rebuild itself, both physically and morally. The scars of the war will remain for generations. But as the world moves into the post-war era, one thing becomes clear. The story of Nazi Germany is not just a tale of military defeat, but a warning. A warning of the dangers of totalitarianism, the cost of blind loyalty, and the tragic consequences of a leader who refused to see the truth. As the dust settles on the ruins of Berlin and the world begins to rebuild, the question remains: how do we ensure that the lessons of this dark chapter in history are never forgotten? How do we prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again? Hitler's final speech, though a call to arms for a lost cause, serves as a chilling reminder of the power of words and the devastating consequences of war. The fall of the Reich is not just a military defeat. It is a lesson in the price of ambition, the cost of hate, and the final price of a dictator's delusions.